Welcome to the dairies of science fiction, where extraordinary stories come to life. Enjoy the journey. He stepped off the shuttle, wobbling slightly as the gravity on Lyria tugged differently than he expected, and instantly wished someone had warned him that mildly lighter than Earth did not mean you will walk like a penguin in a gentle breeze. The landing platform shimmered faintly beneath his feet, not solid so much as politely persistent, like it knew he might fall and was trying to help him along. Floating above him, a cluster of crystal-like structures reflected the lavender sky, each pulsing with a soft inner light that made him feel like he had accidentally wandered into a living kaleidoscope. He clutched the small, intricately carved gift in his hands, a sculpture that reacted to the observer's emotions with subtle shifts in color, and wondered if his carefully chosen gift would impress anyone who didn't have the patience to giggle at human nervousness. The moment he moved forward, a faint hissing sound caught his attention. He looked down and discovered a tiny hovering creature, about the size of a grapefruit, circling his ankles and emitting what he could only describe as a polite, yet accusatory beep. It seemed to be judging him. He tried to shoo it away, only for it to dart in tighter circles, almost like it had read his thoughts. Yes, yes, humans are clumsy, we know. He took a deep breath, stepped over a low levitation bridge that wobbled like a soft jelly, and immediately regretted the gesture when he stumbled and sent a faint shimmer of mist into the air. The mist swirled around his shoes, and he half expected it to apologize for not being solid enough. The hovering creature gave a soft, almost maternal hum of disapproval. He muttered something about human grace, which was promptly ignored. At the end of the bridge, the palace rose before him, a crystalline structure that floated half an inch above the ground, shimmering with golden highlights and threads of bioluminescence. As he approached, a group of courtiers turned to look, their elongated ears twitching with polite curiosity. One of them, taller than him by what seemed like a full head and radiating soft lavender light from their skin, gave a barely perceptible nod. He returned it with the awkward enthusiasm of someone trying to appear both confident and harmless, which probably read as slightly deranged. Then he saw her, the princess, the queen's daughter, standing on a platform above him. She looked human at first glance, her silvery skin catching the sunlight in a way that made it seem almost translucent, like moonlight over water. But her ears were long, elegantly curved, and twitched in time with her expressions, each movement delicate and deliberate, a silent language all her own. Her hair was platinum blonde, falling loosely over her shoulders, slightly windswept even though there was no wind. Her eyes were bright, curious, and for reasons he could not entirely explain, entirely amused. She leaned slightly forward, as if she could see every thought he hadn't yet had and found them all endearingly foolish. Swallowing hard, he stepped forward, extending his hands with the gift, and tripped over the edge of the platform. Not disastrously, but enough that the sculpture shifted in his grip and glowed a warm amber, as if laughing quietly at him. The princess laughed, a soft, melodic sound that made him forget momentarily to be embarrassed. She tilted her head, watching him with a teasing patience. "Careful," she said, and he couldn't tell if she meant the bridge, his footing, or the entirety of human presence on her planet. He laughed nervously, brushing off the incident, and tried to make conversation. I brought this for you. I hope it's appropriate." The sculpture pulsed, cycling through gentle blues and pinks. "It's lovely," she said, leaning closer, her long ears twitching. "Though humans do tend to overthink gestures like this. You've put far too much thought into it, which is either incredibly sweet or a little terrifying." He nearly dropped it again, which only made her laugh harder. A floating pet, vaguely feline in shape but translucent and with wings like liquid glass, drifted past, sniffing him like he was a particularly awkward piece of furniture. By the time they finished exchanging small jokes about human clumsiness and alien pets, the initial tension of the palace, the looming queen, and the alien culture had softened into something dangerously lighthearted. He realized, with a mix of awe and panic, that he was not just navigating a foreign world. He was being watched by someone whose curiosity was as sharp as it was playful, and that made every misstep both thrilling and entirely mortifying. The platform hummed beneath him, the crystals flickered in sympathetic amusement, and he wondered if he was supposed to bow, wave, or just run away very, very slowly. She tilted her head again, long ears twitching like a question mark. "You're not from around here, are you?" she asked, and he, utterly honest despite himself, grinned. "I hope that's obvious." Her laughter rang out again, a gentle chime that made him wonder if getting lost in translation could ever feel this good. The princess motioned for him to follow, and he did so with the caution of someone tiptoeing through a hall of invisible tripwires, which, on Lyria, might have been a literal concern. The corridors of the palace floated slightly above the floor, connected by shimmering bridges that wobbled if you leaned too heavily on them, and he instantly regretted wearing shoes designed for Earth gravity. Each step was a negotiation with physics, and each wobble seemed to be judged by an audience of tiny levitating orbs that hovered near the ceilings, blinking like sentinels of amusement. "Careful," she said, glancing over her shoulder, the corners of her mouth lifting in quiet mischief. "These bridges have moods. Some of them like to dance when humans cross them." He nearly tripped, and she snorted in laughter. He bowed slightly, a mock apology to the bridge, and it quivered in response, sending a faint ripple through the air. The princess shook her head, her long ears twitching with every subtle expression. "You know," she said, "you could make a sport out of this. Human acrobatics meets alien architecture. I'd subscribe to the channel." He laughed, feeling some of the lingering tension melt, and hoped that she didn't notice just how red his ears, entirely human and embarrassingly warm, had become. As they walked, floating gardens opened up on either side, their bioluminescent plants releasing soft, melodic hums when brushed against. A small, winged creature darted past him, narrowly missing his head, and he ducked instinctively, muttering, "I swear I didn't know I was auditioning for some kind of alien slapstick show." The princess laughed, a clear, musical sound that seemed to make the plants' hums harmonize with her voice. "You are," she said, teasing. "Welcome to interspecies comedy." She reached out, plucking a floating pet from the air and handing it to him. The creature blinked at him with what seemed like polite skepticism, then began circling his head. "I think it likes you," she said, one eyebrow raised, "or it's plotting your demise. Hard to tell sometimes." He tried to feed it a tiny pellet that had materialized from his pocket, uncertain if it was appropriate alien sustenance. The creature sniffed it and then flung it into the air, where it hovered mid-flight for a moment before landing neatly on the princess's shoulder. She chuckled, leaning closer to whisper in a conspiratorial tone, "It knows who's boss." He laughed nervously, realizing that navigating this planet required diplomacy, agility, and a strong sense of humor, preferably all at once. They reached a chamber filled with holographic archives, floating panels displaying images, historical records, and star maps that hovered in midair. He extended a hand hesitantly, touching a map of Lyria's neighboring systems, and watched as a projection of a tiny spacecraft blinked along the routes, leaving trails of light. "This is incredible," he said, trying to mask his awe with a joke. "So if I take a wrong turn, I could end up in a black hole." The princess laughed again, a sound that made even the cold, glowing panels seem warmer. "Possibly. Though I'd miss the entertainment value," she said, her long ears flicking with amusement. "Humans seem to be spectacularly clumsy wherever they go." They moved together, joking about the absurdities of each other's worlds. He tried to explain human food, using exaggerated gestures and wild metaphors, and she mimicked him, her ears twitching comically as she exaggerated human eating habits with a playful grin. The floating pets joined in, swooping past like miniature referees in a chaotic game. Even the holograms seemed to shimmer brighter with every laugh they shared. As the laughter settled into a comfortable rhythm, he realized that this day, meant to be a formal presentation of a gift, had turned into something entirely unexpected. He was learning to understand her long-ear gestures, subtle glances, and teasing remarks. She was learning to appreciate the awkward charm of a human who didn't entirely belong, but somehow made the journey brighter. For the first time, he felt that this meeting might be less about ceremony and more about connection. A gentle bridge spanning worlds, built with humor, curiosity, and shared amusement. By the time they paused near a floating fountain that rippled with a soft inner light, he was grinning despite himself. She turned to him, ears flicking with mischievous curiosity, and asked, "Do humans always trip into my palace so charmingly?" He laughed, realizing that yes, on this planet, perhaps they did. They stepped out onto a terrace that floated several meters above a garden of glowing flora, and he immediately realized that Lyria did not do ordinary gravity. Each step felt like wading through a gentle, invisible current, and he found himself flailing slightly, arms flapping as if he were auditioning for some very slow-motion swimming competition. The princess noticed and let out a small laugh, her long ears twitching like delicate antennae picking up the vibrations of his embarrassment. "You move as if the air itself is conspiring against you," she teased. He forced a grin, attempting to regain dignity, and muttered, "It's a cultural adaptation, very exclusive to humans, apparently." She shook her head, chuckling, and the sound made the soft, floating lights around them pulse like the beat of an amused heart. As they moved along the terrace, floating platforms drifted lazily above a sparkling pool of liquid that reflected the sky in ripples of violet and gold. A group of translucent, winged creatures swooped around them, diving and twisting in patterns that seemed almost choreographed. One of them zipped too close to him, and he flailed, accidentally tapping a control panel built into the terrace railing. Instantly, a holographic map of the city sprang to life, showing pathways that hovered mid-air, glowing routes connecting buildings and gardens. The princess raised an eyebrow, clearly impressed. "Accidentally useful," she said, her voice laced with amusement. He gave a sheepish bow. "I call it human ingenuity, mostly accidental." They descended onto one of the bridges, the motion causing him to sway and nearly collide with a cluster of floating lanterns. He caught them just in time, setting them wobbling with a slight bounce that made her laugh outright. "You could be a professional bridge dancer," she said, teasing. He laughed nervously, realizing that on Lyria, humor might actually be the safest form of diplomacy. A few citizens passed by, their elongated ears flicking in acknowledgement. They gave polite nods, and he returned awkward gestures, worried he had committed some minor faux pas. The princess leaned in and whispered, "They like you, or they're trying not to look like they're laughing at you." They wandered deeper into the city, which floated above the surface in modular platforms linked by beams of light. A small, hovering vendor approached, offering a luminous fruit that pulsed faintly in response to touch. He hesitated, unsure if he should accept or bow, and in doing so accidentally triggered a brief projection of holographic animals from the fruit. A tiny, prancing herd of multicolored creatures appeared, prancing in midair, startling a passing pedestrian and causing the princess to laugh until she clutched her sides. "You're a walking disaster," she said, her ears flicking with amusement, "but somehow delightful." He grinned, relieved that his embarrassment was turning into shared amusement. They paused near a marketplace where artisans displayed floating tools, shimmering fabrics, and miniature star maps that rotated gently above their stands. He tried to interact with one holographic map, causing a miniature projection of a spacecraft to spin wildly out of control. The princess nudged him playfully. "It's fine, it just wanted to dance with you." He laughed, muttering, "I swear it's not me, it's the gravity or maybe my innate talent for chaos." She rolled her eyes affectionately, and for a moment the city around them seemed to fade into a playful backdrop for their laughter. At a quiet alcove, she finally slowed, her expression softening. "You're not like other visitors," she said. "Most come with protocol and polish. You come with, well, a human mess, and somehow it's charming. He realized he didn't have to impress her with perfection. Humor, curiosity, and sincerity were enough. They watched the floating gardens shimmer in the dimming light, and he noticed her long ears twitch subtly with each tiny sound, her attention fully on him, and he felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through him. Before he could respond, a floating pet swooped past, wrapping itself around his shoulders like a translucent scarf. The princess laughed again, eyes twinkling. See, even the city wants to approve of you. He shook his head, laughing along, realizing that for the first time in his life, every misstep, every awkward gesture seemed like part of the story unfolding, one that he didn't fully understand but couldn't wait to continue. They reached a quiet chamber near the heart of the palace, a place where the walls shimmered like liquid silver and soft, bioluminescent vines curled along the edges, pulsing gently with a rhythm almost like a heartbeat. The princess led him to a small platform that hovered a few inches above the polished floor. He stepped carefully, aware that one misstep could send him floating unceremoniously into the wall. "Relax," she said, her long ears flicking in amusement. "The platform won't eat you, probably." He chuckled nervously, trying to ignore the tiny ripple of panic in his stomach as he adjusted his stance. He set the gift down in front of her, the carved sculpture glowing faintly in response to her presence. Its surface shifted from soft blues to gentle gold, as if it sensed the anticipation in the room. He cleared his throat. I hope this is suitable. It's meant to convey admiration, I suppose." The princess leaned closer, studying it with an expression that was part curiosity, part amusement. "Humans are so precise with their gestures," she said. "I half expected to apologize if I touch it incorrectly." He laughed, and for a moment the serious weight of the palace, the queen, and interstellar diplomacy melted away. She picked up the sculpture delicately, her long fingers tracing its contours. "It's thoughtful," she said softly, then paused, tilting her head. Her ears twitched in a way he hadn't noticed before, almost like punctuation to a sentence. "But tell me," she added, her voice taking on a mischievous lilt, "will you marry him?" The words landed like a comet striking the calm surface of his mind. He froze, blinked, and nearly dropped his hands in panic. "Excuse me." He stammered, unsure if she meant the sculpture or him, or whether she was making a joke he didn't understand. The princess let out a soft, melodic laugh, clearly amused by his stunned expression. "Don't look so alarmed. I'm merely testing your reaction. Curiosity, you understand." He swallowed hard, trying to regain composure. I certainly didn't," he trailed off, realizing that fumbling words were only making the situation more absurd. She tilted her head, her ears flicking like a conductor marking tempo, and said with a teasing smile, "Relax. I like that you're flustered. It's entertaining." He couldn't help but grin despite himself, the tension breaking into a mixture of awe, embarrassment, and relief. A floating pet drifted past, looping around his shoulders like a translucent scarf, and he reached out instinctively to steady it, only to cause it to flip midair and land neatly on her shoulder. She chuckled, eyes sparkling. "Even the pets are conspiring with me," she said. "You're charmingly helpless." He laughed, shaking his head. "I think I'm becoming a permanent part of the palace comedy troupe." The princess set the sculpture down and turned fully to face him. "I don't often meet humans who are both sincere and completely incapable of graceful movement," she said, the amusement in her voice mingling with something warmer, subtler. "It's refreshing." He realized then that she wasn't teasing maliciously. She was inviting him into a connection, a bridge across worlds built on humor, honesty, and unexpected vulnerability. He exhaled slowly, heart still racing, and dared a small joke. "So, about that marriage question, do you always ask potential suitors this early, or am I just lucky?" She laughed again, a soft, musical sound that made the silver walls shimmer more brightly. "Consider yourself a trial participant," she said, her ears twitching like punctuation marks of delight. "But don't worry. You're performing better than most." He laughed nervously, realizing that despite the absurdity of the moment, there was an undeniable spark of connection. Humor had softened the tension, and something deeper had begun to stir. The floating lanterns hummed around them, the sculpture pulsed softly, and the princess's gaze lingered in a way that made the vastness of the palace feel unexpectedly intimate. He had arrived to present a gift, and yet he found himself wrapped up in something far more unpredictable, a story unfolding in real time, filled with laughter, curiosity, and a thrilling, gentle hint of affection. The princess extended her hand with a playful flourish, and he took it, feeling a jolt of light energy pass through their fingers, as if the palace itself approved of their collaboration. She led him down a spiral staircase that hovered mid-air, each step rotating slowly like a carousel built for interstellar royalty. He wobbled precariously, arms flailing, and she couldn't resist a small laugh. "You know," she said, long ears flicking with amusement, "I think you might be the only human who can trip elegantly and still look impressive." He bowed slightly mid-step, a mock gesture of gratitude toward her compliment, and almost tipped sideways, catching himself on the rail with the grace of a startled cat. They arrived in a chamber that seemed alive, walls pulsating with holographic symbols and shifting constellations. Floating panels displayed intricate maps of distant star systems, swirling nebulae, and detailed schematics of spacecraft. He reached out tentatively, brushing a panel that displayed the trajectory of comets passing near Lyria. The moment he touched it, the panel sprang to life, projecting a tiny comet that zipped across the room in a miniature orbit, narrowly missing his head. "I swear it's not trying to hit me," he said quickly, ducking. "I think it's just enthusiastic." She laughed, her long ears flicking in rhythm with her amusement. "It's a Lyranian comet. They have personalities. Most are harmless, though some can be mischievous." Encouraged, he began pressing buttons and swiping through holograms, accidentally activating a miniature holographic dragon that fluttered its wings wildly, sending sparks of light bouncing off the walls. The princess leaned over to steady him, her ear brushing his shoulder, and whispered, "Careful. That one bites metaphorically mostly." He tried to make a joke, but his words came out tangled as the dragon looped around him, projecting tiny explosions of harmless light. She laughed harder, tilting her head, ears twitching like delicate instruments of amusement. "You have a talent for chaos," she said, "and somehow I find it charming." He grinned, realizing that for the first time, mistakes weren't disastrous. They were part of the story they were building together. He reached for a panel showing an ancient Lyranian ship, its design elegant and alien, and tried to replicate a maneuver from one of his favorite Earth sci-fi shows. The ship spun wildly in holographic space, narrowly avoiding collisions with projected asteroids. She clapped her hands, eyes sparkling. "Brilliant, or completely catastrophic, I can't decide." He laughed, ducking as a holographic asteroid zipped past, leaving a glowing streak in the air. A small, translucent creature, part bird, part fish, drifted past, inspecting his hands as if evaluating his competence. He held out a finger and it perched there briefly, blinking slowly. The princess tilted her head, watching with curiosity and amusement. "You've made a friend," she said, "though it may be judging your spatial awareness." He whispered back, "I hope it's a generous judge." They continued through the chamber, discovering hidden alcoves filled with ancient devices, some humming softly, others pulsing like they had hearts of their own. She showed him how to activate a floating archive of historical records, and he accidentally triggered a holographic projection of the queen giving a speech. He ducked quickly, pretending he had meant to do that, and she laughed, covering her mouth with her hand. "You're like a walking charm bomb," she said. "Everything around you reacts." Hours passed unnoticed, filled with laughter, playful mishaps, and shared wonder. He began to understand her subtle gestures, the way her long ears twitched when amused, or when intrigued, or when she wanted to challenge him gently. She, in turn, seemed fascinated by his unpolished enthusiasm, his human tendency to fumble spectacularly yet persistently. In the glow of the floating archives and the soft hum of ancient technology, they found a rhythm together, one that balanced curiosity, humor, and a burgeoning sense of trust. By the time they left the chamber, he realized he was no longer just a visitor. He was part of a shared story, one that involved laughter, wonder, and the thrilling unpredictability of two worlds colliding in ways neither had fully anticipated. They returned from the archive chamber to the grand hall, where light danced along floating panels and the floor hummed faintly beneath their feet. The princess gestured for him to follow, and he did so, mindful of the shifting gravity that made even the simplest steps feel like navigating a river of invisible jelly. Just as he was beginning to feel a measure of confidence, a trio of alien envoys materialized near the entrance, their robes glowing faintly and their elongated ears twitching with scrutiny. They regarded him with expressions that teetered between curiosity and mild suspicion. One of them, taller and more severe than the others, stepped forward. "We understand you present gifts," the envoy said, voice carrying a metallic resonance, "but your gesture has been interpreted unusually." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of protocol. He blinked. "Unusually," he repeated, attempting to sound diplomatic, though the tremor in his voice betrayed his panic. The princess leaned toward him, whispering, "Don't worry. This is where your chaotic charm will come in handy." He swallowed and tried to explain. "I assure you, the gift was meant to show respect and admiration, not any form of alliance." As he spoke, he gestured too widely, accidentally activating a hovering crystal panel that displayed a holographic map of Lyria. The map projected itself into the air, highlighting every palace route, floating garden, and secret corridor with blinking lights. One of the envoys' eyes widened in shock, and he winced. "I may have demonstrated more than intended," he stammered. The princess chuckled softly, her long ears twitching like delicate instruments of amusement. "It's fine. Let me help," she said, and reached over to press a series of floating symbols. The map folded neatly, and the envoys blinked in confusion. "Humans have unique methods of communication," she said casually, her tone perfectly balanced between teasing and authoritative. He exhaled, feeling like a trapped comet had just passed. The tallest envoy fixed him with a look that could melt titanium. "Your explanation is unusual but entertaining." The princess added, "He also has excellent timing." For humor, not diplomacy. He coughed nervously, unsure whether to be insulted or grateful. She leaned slightly closer, whispering, "Smile. Humor can save you." He did awkwardly, and the tension in the room lightened slightly. To further diffuse the situation, he gestured to a floating pet that had followed him from the terrace, trying to demonstrate its harmlessness by letting it perch on his shoulder. The pet immediately shot a small ribbon of light toward the envoys, who reacted as though it were a ceremonial salute. The princess laughed outright. "See, even the creatures approve of your explanation." He laughed too, realizing that his accidental theatrics had turned a potential diplomatic disaster into a moment of shared amusement. By the time the envoys withdrew, murmuring among themselves and still clearly unsure what to make of him, the princess turned to him, eyes sparkling. "You have a talent for chaos," she said, ears flicking with delight. "And somehow it's exactly what this palace needed." He chuckled, brushing his hair back, and muttered, "I think I'm earning a reputation for accidental heroics." She nudged him gently with her elbow. "It's a good one, the kind people will remember fondly." They walked down a corridor, laughing softly at the absurdity of the situation. He realized that the palace, with all its floating bridges, holographic archives, and delicate creatures, was no longer intimidating. With humor as their bridge, they navigated missteps, misunderstandings, and interstellar protocols alike. He had survived a near-diplomatic catastrophe with nothing more than charm, clumsiness, and laughter, and he felt a growing sense of connection, not just to the princess, but to this world that had seemed so alien just days ago. As they paused by a floating fountain, he caught a reflection of her in the softly rippling water, her long ears twitching with subtle amusement. She smiled at him, and for the first time he felt that he truly belonged in this story, awkwardly, humorously, and completely. They wandered to the highest terrace of the palace, where the air shimmered with a faint, silver haze and floating lanterns drifted lazily, casting soft light over the city below. He took a careful step onto a levitating platform which wobbled lightly but held firm, and she raised an amused eyebrow. "You're improving," she said, long ears flicking subtly, "though I wouldn't call it graceful yet." He laughed, the sound catching in the crisp night air, and held out his hands theatrically. "I'll take what I can get. Grace was never my strong suit." She shook her head, chuckling, and leaned closer, her hair brushing lightly against his arm. The city beneath them pulsed with soft bioluminescence, and the distant hum of hovering vehicles and floating pedestrians created a gentle rhythm, like the heartbeat of a world alive. He looked at her, her silvery skin glowing faintly under the lanterns, her ears twitching with each subtle expression, and realized how much had changed since he first stumbled onto the palace terraces. He had arrived awkward, unsure, and nervous. Now, despite still tripping over invisible gravity, he felt a quiet confidence, less about fitting in perfectly and more about embracing the chaos and finding his own place. She turned to him, eyes bright, and held out a hand. "I've been meaning to say," she paused, ears flicking, and he held his breath. "Your gift, it was more than a gesture. It showed thought, patience, and humor, all things that matter more than ceremony or perfection." He laughed softly, brushing his fingers nervously along the edge of the platform. "I only hoped it wouldn't be a disaster," he admitted. She smiled, a small, teasing tilt of her lips. "Disasters can be charming," she said, "especially when they come with laughter and honesty." The floating lanterns shifted gently, casting new patterns on their faces, and he realized she was serious. She stepped closer, ears flicking in a way that made him notice the tiniest emotions, subtle and revealing. "I think I understand humans better now," she continued. "You approach life without fear of mistakes, and somehow it brings warmth to everything around you. I admire that." He felt his chest tighten, a mixture of awe and relief. I never thought I could fit in here," he said quietly. "But you've made it feel possible." She laughed softly, brushing a hand against his arm, and the sound seemed to make the lanterns dance. For a moment they just stood there, sharing the quiet humor of the situation, the floating pets circling lazily, the city glowing beneath them, the strange physics of Lyria making every step an adventure. Then she tilted her head, and for the first time the teasing in her eyes softened into something more personal, more real. "I find myself wishing you wouldn't leave," she said simply, her long ears flicking in subtle rhythm. He swallowed, realizing the same thought had taken root in him. "I don't want to go," he admitted, grinning despite the nerves fluttering in his stomach. The palace seemed to hum approval, or perhaps it was just the soft resonance of the floating structures, but either way it felt right. They walked side by side toward a small alcove filled with softly glowing flora, joking quietly about the oddities of human culture and Lyranian pets, laughter blending with the gentle hum of the city. He felt the tension of the past days, the near disasters, the diplomatic confusions, the fear of being out of place, melt into something warm and steady, anchored by connection, humor, and mutual respect. As they paused under a glowing tree, she brushed a strand of hair behind her ear and smiled. "You've changed this palace," she said softly. "Not the walls or the bridges, but the way we see it. You've reminded us how to laugh and be curious, even when things go wrong." He laughed quietly, realizing how true it was. "And you've changed me," he said. "Not just surviving this place, but finding joy in it and maybe even in us." She tilted her head, long ears twitching in approval, and nudged him gently. "Perhaps this is only the beginning," she said, "of our story." He smiled, and for the first time he felt completely at home, not just on Lyria, but in a story that was theirs to write together, filled with laughter, curiosity, and the thrilling unpredictability of two worlds meeting in the most unexpected way. The lanterns floated around them, casting soft, shifting light, and the city hummed below, as if celebrating the quiet, perfect closure of this chapter.